Mark, just to elaborate on your previous answer, I believe that agencies will need to satisfy the fact that they need to exhaust the list of, you mentioned Russian interpreters, no matter what language that is, of qualified people before they go down the route of, say, somebody, if you say they simply do not have an interpreter of a required qualification and it's an emergency, you mentioned that there will be another qualification or lower qualification, I'm not entirely sure, authorization to go down to a lower qualification from a high ranking police officer. Could you please elaborate just to understand that you will make sure that agencies will exhaust the list of qualified people? They're not just going to jump because possibly lesser qualified will be not as not as well paid as qualified people.
Yeah, that's a really important point. So there's a couple of points within that I want to address. I like the way you've just said that they should exhaust, the agency should exhaust every possibility. So this is what happens at the moment. Police officer asks for a Russian interpreter and an agency comes back eventually and says, can't get you someone. And what they'll say is, right, we can get you one tomorrow at 3 p.m. And it might be that that's not possible because it's a very serious offence. What they do at the moment is say, right, it's over to you now. So what I then have is a cop, police officer in a police station who has no idea how to get another interpreter because he's not an expert or she's not an expert in interpreting. So that's a really good point. And that's what happens on the current frameworks. On our DPS, we're going to be saying to these agencies, you have to find us someone. Saying that you can't is not an option. So if you can't get me a fully qualified and vetted Russian interpreter for 4 p.m. today, when can you? Because it may be that I can do a risk assessment, the police can do a risk assessment, keep that person in overnight or release them to come back if it's suitable. Or that agency may come back and say, I cannot get you a DPSI or a DPI, but I've got someone who has done some interpreting and also they're not vetted to MPPV3. But they can get there for 4 p.m. today. Now, if there is no one else that can make it, then we may decide that the inspector or above will do a risk assessment and take that person. But we want to know that they have exhausted every possibility. Now, that includes the NERPC register. It includes talking to other agencies and having mutual aid between them. No longer is it going to be acceptable for them to come back and say to a cop, down to you, find someone. And they know that. I've spoken to those that are on the DPS about that. So the NERPC register is going to become quite important for that, because if there's someone who's on the NERPC register who has the qualifications and the vetting but isn't registered with an agency, they may well be the next option. How they get onboarded with the agency is nothing for me to deal with. That's for agencies to do.
So who will be auditing those agencies and by what authority? And what will auditing involve? And how transparent this process can be?
Okay, so who will do the auditing? It's me. How will it be done? We talked in an earlier question I answered about how I go and do forward and reverse auditing to make sure that they have onboarded that person correctly, that they have the right qualifications and vetting, and also that they got paid on time. I go forward to check that. I look at the onboarding process for interpreters to make sure that, and I can pick whichever interpreter I want from their books and check to see that they have the qualifications. I look at the certificates. I look at all the information. It's all in confidence, and I don't actually care what the name is, to be honest. It's never anyone I know. I choose a date and say, show me who you onboarded on that date. And there's all different ways that I can select the data. Is it transparent? No, it isn't transparent. It's a commercial organisation talking with the supplier. So the police are talking with the agent agency, and it's not transparent in as much as I can't tell you who I've spoken to, I can't tell you the names of the interpreters that I've looked at, but on our website that I talked about earlier, when we finally get that website, there will be the template for how I audit, and it will tell you the different sections that I've looked at around onboarding and operations, all kinds of things. It will give you all of that data so you'll know what they've been tested against, and it will also tell you whether they've got a green, amber or red. We call it a RAG status. If they get a red status, they're not going to be on the books anymore, the agencies. And the other part of your question I've actually remembered was by what authority. Any organisation that wants to be on the DPS must sign up to this. It's part of the specification. You will be audited. And it's said in the specification you'll be audited every 12 months. I've made it 11 months. I want to see that their policies are up to date. I want to see that they're constantly making progress and they're constantly making changes for the better. And I decided it would be every 11 months. COVID hasn't stopped me going to these organisations and seeing them in person. Some of them actually had to open an office for me because they don't use it at the moment. But I'm going there to check that everything is safe. And let me just tell one little secret. I am checking that they've got CCTV and proper locks on the doors because your data is stored there. So I'm checking data protection as well. It's not for me, it's for your benefit that all that actually takes place.
At which stage will agencies be vetted and audited? I know you said every 11 months, but at which point you would start, where would be the first one and the subsequent? Is it every 11 months after the start of the contract? Are there any exceptions to that? Is it a transparent process? I know we already touched on the transparency, although you initially said it's not, but then you mentioned websites, so it's going to be on the website. So that's already indication that it's a transparent process. People can actually look what's happening. And do you have a team working with you on this?
I'd love a team. Let's deal with that. I'd love a team. It's me. There is no one else. It's me. Maybe eventually we'll have a team, but at the moment I'm qualified. I do that. It's part of my job. It was part of my role description. Let's pull apart some of those other parts to the question. When will it happen? So it's nothing to do with the contract. Those companies, those agencies went on the framework or go on the framework. September 14th, the framework started. And so audits have been September, October. So if we take agency A audited in September, they're going to be audited next August. No, there aren't any exceptions. We don't know what's going to happen with COVID. We may get a total lockdown. If we got a total lockdown next August, September, I wouldn't be able to go and see those agencies. What I would probably do was audit as much as I can remotely, and then the bits that I can't do remotely would have to be held over and go and see them when I can. But actually, every agency has been really helpful and said, right, we're not supposed to be open, but we'll put COVID precautions in place. We'll open so that you can come to the office. And I'm still doing so. I'm meeting with an agency on Wednesday, and they're opening up so that we can have a proper meeting, because you and I are talking, communicating so much easier now than we ever have on Zoom, because we can see each other. There's no stuttering, there's no stopping and all that. So communication in person, well, it's what you're an expert in anyway, and all the interpreters are, but that's the way to do it. So nothing will stop it, because it's nothing to do with a contract. They were vetted and audited this year. They'll be audited again next year. Did I answer all the parts? I can't remember.
Yes,
Okay.
I'm sure you did. But how can you make sure, although you did say that there will be auditing, there will be information on the website,
Yeah.
but how can you be sure that the agency is compliant? And what are the tools or instruments you can use to ensure that the standards are not going to fall and they're not going to divert from what they said they would do?
The only bit of the standard I can't deal with is the quality of actual interpreting. That's done through quality assurance, it's done through checks, and there are processes in place, as there always have been. Certainly when you give evidence at court as an interpreter, you may well be watched and QA'd, and there are other QA processes that are put in place. In relation to the earlier part of that question about the agencies, the police know what they require. Anytime they don't get what they require, there must have been a reason for it, and it must have been explained and authorised. Otherwise, it won't happen. It can't happen. Does that make sense in that way? And then secondly, every month there is management information that goes from the agency to every client. And that's not region when we've been talking about the 7 forces. Each of those 7 forces will get information telling them how many Russian interpreters were in, well, every language, how many interpreters were in, how long they were there for, how much they got paid, what their qualifications were, what their vetting was, and exception reporting. Any that were sent that didn't have the qualifications or the vetting or anything else, experience perhaps, is put in as an exception report. They are managed by the procurement and operational teams within the police service. And then if there are any issues, I can oversee that. It's my role to oversee that, but I leave the forces to deal with it themselves. And they're the client. The force is the client. They have to be happy with it. There is a contract manager at every agency that works with them. And if the police aren't happy with what they're getting, just like if you're not happy with the food you get from Tesco's, you take it back, you complain. They're in the same position. So I want you to be assured that the quality, not the quality of the interpreting, but the specifications are policed in the real sense of the word and monitored constantly. You don't get a car that turns up with just 3 wheels on it, you have 4. So we don't get an interpreter that turns up that doesn't have a DPI or a DPSI unless it's been authorised for a specific reason. And I want to make a point here, don't forget, not all the work that we do with interpreters in the police world is evidential. We might be going out into a community to talk to them about something unrelated with evidence, and that gives a new interpreter an opportunity, as long as they can interpret, gives them an opportunity to work with police to get familiar with it, and I'm going to be supporting that anytime that it's appropriate, but it's not always appropriate.
What if police, I'm not going to say force, but let's go down to actual practical reality situation. A police officer is not happy with the interpreter they were supplied with, and they make a complaint. Who they will complain, who they will have to put the complaint to, and who will deal with that complaint, and how this process is going to be over supervised and assessed. Who will be responsible for complaints against interpreters? Who would deal with complaints?
Okay, well, nothing's changed. You've all been working under CCS or ESPO contracts. Every procurement process, whether it's cleaning, catering, mechanics, whatever process you have has a complaints process, and ours is no different. I worked under CCS and ESPO and we had a complaints process. The police know how to complain. Sometimes their complaint isn't valid. Sometimes it's a mistake that they've made, that they didn't understand how to use an interpreter properly. And we're dealing with that. We're trying to encourage cops to read the information that we provide to them. It's not their fault, but they're very busy people. But they need to know how to use the tool, which is an interpreter in this case, correctly. But if there is a complaint against an interpreter about their conduct, behaviour, attendance, then there is a contract in place that allows them, the officer complains to the agency, and the agency have a complaints department that will investigate that. If it goes against the code of ethics, the police code of ethics, there will be an opportunity for the police service to deal with that. If it goes against your codes of conduct, which are very detailed, far more detailed than the police code of ethics, then either the agency will deal with it or refer it, if you're part of NERPC or NRCPD, can refer it to them. For those organisations to oversee an investigation. The vast majority of the time, there are no complaints. There are so few complaints when I audited that it was difficult to find some to deal with in some cases. Many of the complaints are that you turned up late. Well, in London or other parts of the country, it's difficult to get to the place and traffic might be bad. So they're normally dealt with at a very low level. It's only the very few serious complaints that we get about conduct, criminal behaviour or ethics that will be investigated fully. But there are processes in place. Be assured there are processes to make sure that they are investigated fully. What we're now going to have is me in place where I will oversee some of those. I want to know what those complaints are, and I want to know the result of them to make sure that if someone is so bad they shouldn't be an interpreter, that they're not kept on for commercial reasons. And you know what I mean by that.